So, one of the comments that was made on my Rhett and Link video was a question about how it's possible to believe in God and believe that He is good when God allows child abuse in this world. And the answer I gave was a bit quick and flippant. And I feel like it deserves better attention than that because it is a big question and it's a very personal question for me because I went through abuse in my own childhood. I have a mentally ill mother, so mentally ill that she can verbally and even sometimes physically abuse people and feel 100% justified in it. My father was a complete rageaholic when I was growing up, and to this day, he remains a fairly selfish and self focused person in a lot of ways. And, I've gone through this life of the people I counted on for help the most were people who abused me. And I was bullied in high school, I was bullied in primary school, I was bullied at church, I've been, mistreated in just about every place I've ever been to some degree. So this question of abuse, it isn't an impersonal question for me. I'm not up in some ivory tower with this. This is real for me. And look, I'd be lying if I said that I never had moments where I was looking at the amount of pain I was in my life, the amount of mistreatment that I was enduring, and said to God, why are you letting this happen to me? Why are you allowing this? And in those moments, I did feel abandoned and betrayed by God, even. And I've even had times where I wondered if God was just laughing at my misery rather than having any kind of empathy for me, because it just seemed like, well, if God has the power to take away this pain, why doesn't He just do it? You know, it is a hard question, but there is this flip side to it where a lot of the reasons the abuses I suffered for so long bothered me as much as they did was because I lacked conviction that they were wrong. I lacked conviction that I didn't deserve the mistreatment that I was receiving from other people. And if I look back on why I doubted it, it was because these people who were abusing me, like typically abusers don't just mistreat their abuse victims. They also try to convince their abuse victims that what's happening to them is somehow deserved and just, and that that it's the abuse victim deserves what's happening to them and therefore should put up with it. That's a big part of why abusers can, get away with abusing people for very long chronic periods of time, that they can, that sometimes the abuse victims will feel this need to defend and protect the abuser. And yes, there were times in my upbringing where my parents would even twist and, you know, misuse Bible verses to suggest that I deserved what was happening to me. But what happened at a certain point in my life, about 16 actually, about age 16, I began to read the Bible by myself. And what it created for me was a very, like reading it for myself rather than just letting someone tell me what it was saying meant that I could actually see what Christianity was meant to mean, and it gave me a platform by which I could know for a fact that what was being done to me was 150% wrong. I could know for a fact that I absolutely didn't deserve it, that I wasn't the worthless piece of poop that all of my abusers were trying to convince me I was, that I wasn't unlovable the way they claimed, that I wasn't deserving of humiliation the way they seemed to think. And I certainly, my worth wasn't just coming from my looks or my money or my accomplishments the way all of these people were trying to make me feel. The Bible allowed me to have an alternate set of values that I could compare my life against. And you might say, well, that's a nice fairy story, Shona. Well, call it that if you must, but it was helpful to me. It helped me get through some really difficult times, and it gave me these solid moorings by which I didn't have to just become like my abusers, and I didn't have to just live by the values that they were brainwashing me with. I was able to believe in a God who wanted to give me dignity and wanted to love me and wanted others to love me. And you might say, well, that doesn't explain the question of why God doesn't change things. Well, one of the stances I've come to take on this question, and I'm not the only one who'll talk about this, by the way. There's a lot of Christian authors who will talk about this. In particular, I'd recommend looking up Joni Eareckson Tada, because she went through just the most spectacular suffering. She was a beautiful girl and a tremendous artist, and I think an equestrian as well. And then one day, in an accident, she became a quadriplegic, and she lost everything, and her mind was straight into that place of absolute despair. And her relationship with God actually helped her to come back from the brink of complete insanity. But, for my part, I mean, that part has been true too, that even during times where I have felt really alone and really so demoralized by how I've been treated in the past that I haven't even been able to make myself talk to anyone, I've still been able to talk to God, and through things like the Bible, through things like my circumstances, I've often felt that I'm receiving an answer back. And again, I realize people will say, well, that's too little too late. Why doesn't God just create justice? Well, the thing that I've noticed for my part is that I don't always treat people perfectly. And, one of the things the Bible talks about is that God is always giving people chances because he's always hoping that they will do the right thing later, even if they're doing the wrong thing today. God doesn't actually want to destroy evildoers. This is a common misconception about the Christian God. He does not actually want anyone to be destroyed. The Bible says this multiple times. God is always hoping that people will grow, that people will mature, that people will do right by each other and by him. So, for God to simply destroy people just because they're doing the wrong thing doesn't make sense. It makes more sense that God would allow people to remain and to see the natural consequences of their actions and to have these opportunities to learn better. And I understand that for a lot of people this won't be a satisfactory answer, because it does essentially mean that God is allowing the abuse to continue. It presumes that abusers can improve, and the popular narrative of our culture is that abusers can't. I'm going to say I don't believe that. I don't buy that, because I've had times in my life where I was reenacting the abuse that was done to me. I've had times where I was abusive towards people. And again, through learning of the Bible and through spending time in prayer, going after therapy, I've been able to improve. And so I very much believe that somebody can act out abusive behaviors and still learn better later in life. And again, you might feel like, well, that seems really still unjust to the victims. They're basically being used as training equipment. And yeah, it is going to sound like that. But one of the thoughts that I've had, and I do believe this, God isn't out there to give us a good time. I think, again, that's a massive misconception people have about God, that God, if he's good, he's just going to make our lives easy and fun and enjoyable. I don't think that's true. I actually think that God is out to make us develop character, that he's out there wanting us to become better people, not just the abusers, but also the victims. That, and the character is more valuable than the ease, because you can have an easy life where everything is handed to you, and you can have every material pleasure, you can have everything really good for you. But what sort of person would you become? Would you necessarily be an empathetic person? Would you necessarily have a sense of persistence? Would you have any sense of morality even necessarily if you had everything really, really easy? I mean, for my own part, I would be skeptical. I very much feel that a lot of my ability to look at other people and really value them as much as I do is precisely because I've suffered. And so I can look at another suffering person and I can understand them. And you might say, well, in a world absent of suffering, that would be unnecessary. Well, I think that God actually values the quality of empathy too much to let us to deprive us of it. So I don't think I would want to live in a world that is absolutely absent of suffering, this side of eternity. You might say, well, then why would you want to go to heaven? Isn't that meant to be a place with no suffering? Yes, but in heaven, that's going to be a place where we have the character, where we've got that built up. That's a totally different situation from the world we're living in now, where you do need to get tough. You need to become that person who's going to stand up to the abusers. And the only way to do that, unfortunately, is by being challenged. And I want to believe that because of the experiences I've had, that in my own way, I can make the world a better place. Probably not in massive ways, but in some way. And I would hope that for other people who have been through the same things I've been through. Whatever you believe in about life or abuse or God or anything else, the fact is that we live in a world where there is abuse. A lot of Calvinists will say that the only reason we're here is because Eve ate an apple from a tree and therefore the world is full of sin. I don't know that I specifically buy into that theology, simply because I feel like it presumes that we should all be held responsible for somebody else's sin rather than our own. And we're very good at, making our own mess. We are very good at doing that already. And I feel that there's a lot of other questions people would naturally have about Christianity and why anyone would think of it as a valid worldview. And I can understand those reservations because there is this horrific history of abuse happening in all kinds of organizations, including churches. But I want to slow the conversation down and point to the fact that what Christianity is very different from what people say it is. Over and over again, as I've read the Bible, I've always found that to be the truth, that what sometimes gets preached from a pulpit is so different from what's on the page. Sometimes it's so different, they might as well be talking about a completely different book, in my opinion. And I think that is the value in sitting down and just reading the Bible for yourself. And you might not agree with all of it, you might not agree with any of it, but at the very least, you're going to have an accurate guide on what Christianity is and isn't. And there is nothing in the Bible. Read the book of Job. There is nothing in the Bible to suggest that God exists just to give us a good time. There's plenty of verses that suggest that God will give us good things to some degree, but he certainly never promises that everything's going to be easy. Every single person in the Bible who gets a blessing, who is promised a blessing and gets it, they go through a time of pain. They go through abuse. Joseph, the biblical Joseph, not Jesus' father, but the other one, he went through abuse. So, it's not an alien concept to the Bible. It's not an alien concept to Christian theology. Um, you know, the acknowledgement of it perhaps might be, um, you know, new to the contemporary church, but that is one of the reasons I have massive problems with the contemporary church. They have been so slow to act when it comes to abuse within their organization. And I find that hugely disappointing. And that is something that I intend to do something about. As it is, I've been filing complaints. I've been, preparing another complaint to send off to a particular Christian organization that I used to work for. Uh, you know, I don't believe we're handed problems to be defeated by them. I actually very much believe that God hands us problems so that we can overcome them. And I feel that whether you see that as a logical answer or not, that answer will give you much more strength to face the problems you've got. And if you are not in that place where you can mentally have that kind of strength, again, I get it. I went through decades of depression, but please try to imagine that it can be better,